Imagine you're just walking down the street in Harlem. It's a typical afternoon. The city is moving fast around you. And you look down, there's a piece of trash on the sidewalk.
Just right there on the concrete.
Right. And you pick it up, and it's a crumpled up NYPD mugshot of a young black man. Just basic identifying info and a stark, really unforgiving photograph.
That's a harsh image.
It really is. Now imagine holding that piece of trash and having it become the singular spark that ultimately leads to painting an official historic portrait of the President of the United States.
It sounds impossible.
Yeah, but you are about to hear how those two drastically different images, the discarded mugshot and the presidential masterpiece, are deeply, inextricably connected. I'm your host, and I'm so excited to get into this.
And I'm thrilled to be here. It really is an incredible trajectory. I mean, we were talking about two completely opposite ends of the human spectrum here. On one side, you have the absolute pinnacle of power and historical documentation. And on the other, you have a system designed to strip away individuality and, reduce a person to a case number.
Today, our deep dive is into Kehinde Wiley, who is this truly monumental contemporary portrait painter. We've got a massive stack of material in front of us today.
We really do. Biographical deep dives, detailed breakdowns of his art, reviews of his major public monuments.
And also the timeline of some very recent, deeply serious controversies surrounding him. So, okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to explore how Wiley takes centuries-old European art history, mashes it up with modern urban black culture, and fundamentally reshapes how we view power, representation, and, well, the very concept of what a masterpiece actually is.
Because he isn't just painting pretty pictures. He is entirely rewriting the visual language of who gets to be immortalized.
Right.
But to really grasp how he does that and why his work hits with such impact, you have to start with where he came from. The environment he grew up in is the engine for everything he challenges later on.
Yeah, you don't just wake up one day and decide to take on the entire history of European wealth and power on canvas without a deeply personal reason. So Wiley was born in Los Angeles in 1977. His mother is African American, and his father was a Nigerian student who actually returned to Nigeria after his studies.
Leaving his mom to raise 6 kids by herself in South Central LA.
Which is, that's a lot.
It's a huge burden. And by all accounts, survival was the primary focus. Money was incredibly tight. They survived on welfare checks, and his mother actually ran what was described as a thrift store.
But it wasn't a normal store, right?
No, not a brick-and-mortar shop. It was essentially just a patch of sidewalk outside their home where she sold whatever she could gather.
Wow. From a patch of sidewalk in LA to the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
But the pivot point here is so fascinating to me. His mom, desperate to keep the kids out of trouble and engaged in anything instructive, really enrolls him and his twin brother in after-school art classes.
And we aren't talking about, making macaroni necklaces here.
Right. She finds rigorous programs. And by the time he's 11 years old, there's a major turning point. The twins are selected out of a group of about 50 kids to go study at an art conservatory in Russia.
Which is wild. Near St. Petersburg, actually. Think about the sensory and psychological shock of that transition.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
You go from the intense, sun-drenched, survival-focused reality of a sidewalk thrift store in 1980s Los Angeles, and suddenly you are thrust into the rigid, frozen, hyper-classical environment of Soviet-era St. Petersburg.
Yeah, you're surrounded by the legacy of the czars and classical Russian art.
It's staggering.
And it was in those Russian forests that Wiley really locked into portraiture. He and his twin brother developed this intense, friendly competition over who could paint the most realistic, technically perfect portraits.
They were pushing each other.
Yeah, they were mastering this deeply old-world skill.
And he brings that intense classical training back to the U.S., keeps refining it, and eventually lands at the Yale University School of Art for his MFA.
Which is a huge deal.
Huge. But what's crucial is that the biggest takeaway he got from Yale wasn't a specific brush technique or a new way to mix oils.
What was it?
It was a conceptual breakthrough. He realized he needed to make the work he wanted to make, rather than just producing what his professors wanted to see.
Which brings us back to that piece of trash on the street. So he's out of Yale, he's doing a residency at the Studio Museum in Harlem, and He finds this crumpled mugshot of a black man in his 20s.
Yeah.
He's holding this thing, and he has a massive epiphany. But what exactly did he see in it? I mean, it's just a mugshot.
He saw the complete absence of grace. He realized that a mugshot is the ultimate anti-portrait.
Anti-portrait. I like that.
Yeah, when he looked at it, it highlighted these massive glaring gaps in how black men were being portrayed in visual culture. They were either completely absent from the grand historical narratives,
Right.
or they were hyper-visible in the context of criminality.
Right. Let me put it this way and tell me if this tracks. Classical European portraits, the ones of the kings, the dukes, the aristocrats, those were basically ancient Instagram filters.
Oh, totally.
But they didn't just, like, smooth out skin. They physically warped reality. They were highly engineered pieces of propaganda designed to make jawlines sharper, shoulders wider, and postures more commanding.
All to create a subconscious feeling of absolute power.
Exactly. Divine right in anyone who looked at them. And a mugshot does the exact opposite. It is designed to strip away all your power, all your dignity, and reduce you to a raw, clinical data point.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The classical portrait gives you the illusion of godhood, and the mugshot removes your humanity.
Wow.
And this is why that moment in Harlem matters so much. Wiley looked at that mugshot and decided to weaponize his elite classical training. He wanted to merge it with modern urban reality.
So he decided to give his subjects what he calls the veneer of the rationale of order.
Exactly.
So he decides to take the exact same visual tools that old European masters used to legitimize aristocrats and apply them to the people society usually ignores or criminalizes. But having a grand conceptual idea is one thing. How does he actually pull this off? I mean, how does he convince kids off the street in Harlem to come inside and pose like 18th century noblemen?
Well, he effectively hijacks the entire aesthetic of the European canon.
Hmm.
And he does it through a process he calls street casting.
Street casting.
Yeah, he literally walks the streets of Harlem, or South Central LA, and looks for young black men, and later women too, who have a certain presence.
Okay.
He invites them into a studio, opens up these massive art history books filled with historical European masterpieces, and asks them to choose a painting.
No way.
Yeah. Then he places them in the exact, specific poses of those historical figures.
There is one incredibly famous example of this from 2005, his painting Napoleon Leading the Army Over the Alps.
Oh, that's a classic.
We all know the original by Jacques-Louis David. It's Napoleon looking incredibly majestic, pointing forward while sitting on this wild, rearing horse. And Wiley reimagines it entirely. The rider is a young African man wearing modern camouflage army fatigues, Timberland boots, a white bandana, and sweatbands. He is sitting on that exact same rearing horse.
That's such a striking image.
But wait, I read that if he's trying to make this realistic to his subject, he actually brought live horses into a New York studio.
He did, because he wanted to get the proportions perfectly accurate. He was applying his rigorous classical training, you know.
Right.
But when he actually put a real man on a real horse in the studio, he realized something shocking. The old European masters totally lied.
Wait, they faked the proportions?
Completely. He realized that the proportions between the rider and the horse in the original David masterpiece were completely unrealistic.
Oh, wow.
Real men look a lot smaller on real horses. The original European artists were acting as propagandists. They were shrinking the horse and expanding the man to make Napoleon look bigger, more heroic, and more powerful than humanly possible.
That is wild, and Wiley exposed the lie by attempting to replicate it in real life. And the aesthetics of Wiley's paintings are just wild, too. It's not just the pose, it's this collision of textures. He uses French Rococo elements.
Yeah.
And for anyone who needs a refresher, think of the ultra-wealthy, highly decorative, pastel-heavy style of the French monarchy just before the Revolution.
The ultimate visual symbol of out-of-touch wealth.
Yes. He fuses that with Islamic architecture, West African textile designs, and then he'll throw in the exact seafoam green from a Martha Stewart Interiors color swatch.
It is a deliberate visual overload. But the mechanism that really makes it work is what he does with the background.
Oh, the backgrounds are fascinating.
Yeah, in traditional classical portraits, the background is usually submissive. It's a sprawling estate or a battlefield, and it's just a prop to prove how much land the subject owns or how many wars they've won.
It stays in the back.
Right, it stays in the back. But Wiley replaces that with incredibly intricate, bright floral patterns. And those vines and flowers are aggressive. They creep into the foreground, literally wrapping around the subject's arms or legs.
So the background is fighting with the subject.
Exactly. By making the floral background active and creeping over the subject, Wiley creates a psychological tension. The background is competing for your attention.
I see.
The viewer's eye literally has to fight to focus on the young black man in the center. It demands that you actively engage with his presence rather than just passively observing him.
It also completely messes with traditional gender norms, doesn't it? He takes these modern men, often in highly masculine streetwear, and surrounds them with traditionally feminine lace and delicate, overwhelming florals.
Yes, and there are even tiny sperm motifs hidden in the background symbolizing vitality.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he puts men in these highly vulnerable, beautifully ornate, almost tender settings.
And he didn't just keep this experiment in New York or LA. He eventually took this entire concept global with a massive series called The World Stage.
Right, he expanded to Mumbai, Senegal, Dakar, Rio de Janeiro, and China. He chose countries that he saw as points of anxiety, curiosity, and production in the 21st century.
What does that look like in practice? Like, how does he adapt the style for those places?
Take Rio de Janeiro, for example. He would find a young man from the favelas, the slums of Rio, someone who was entirely marginalized by Brazilian society, and he would paint them into the visual language of Portuguese colonial monuments.
Oh, wow. So he's taking the street kids and elevating them using the exact architectural and artistic styles of the empires that historically colonized those very regions.
Yes. It grounds the global concept in these incredibly vivid, striking images.
Okay, so what does this all mean, I have to ask? By placing modern urban youth in the exact poses of old European aristocrats or Portuguese colonizers, is Wiley subverting those old oppressive standards of power? Or is he accidentally validating them?
That's a great question.
Like, is he basically saying, yes, the old dead kings were right, this is what power looks like, and we just want a piece of it?
What's fascinating here is that Wiley is acutely aware of that exact tension. He actually describes his own approach as interrogating the notion of the master painter, at once critical and complicit.
Critical and complicit. He's admitting he's part of the problem he's critiquing.
Yes, and he embraces it. He freely admits he is drawn to the flame of that classical illusionism. He loves the aesthetic of it, the skill, the grandeur, the beauty.
Right.
But at the exact same time, he says he wants to blow it out. He's using the language of power to expose the fact that it was always a manufactured illusion, like the shrunken horse, while simultaneously giving the pleasure of that illusion to people who have historically been denied it.
And that tension, that hijacking of power, didn't just stay in the art galleries. It reached the absolute highest levels of American culture. In 2017, Barack Obama selected Kehinde Wiley to paint his official portrait for the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery.
Making him the first black artist to paint an official U.S. presidential portrait.
Which is huge.
The impact of that commission was seismic. After his portrait of the president and Amy Sherrill's portrait of the First Lady were unveiled, museum attendance at the portrait gallery jumped from 1.1 million to 2.1 million people.
It completely shifted who felt invited into that space. You look at the Obama painting, and it's a botanical biography. That is the best way to describe the mechanism at work. Most presidents are painted sitting at a grand mahogany desk looking very stiff.
Usually with some books or a globe to signal intelligence and global reach.
Exactly. And Wiley throws all of that out. Obama is sitting in an antique chair, but he appears to be almost floating in this incredibly dense wall of green foliage. He's leaning forward, no tie, collar open. It's highly intimate.
And every plant in that foliage tells a specific chapter of his life. There are chrysanthemums, which are the official flower of Chicago.
Right.
There are African lilies representing Kenya, honoring his late father. And there's jasmine, representing his childhood in Hawaii. It's a map of his identity, not a map of his conquests.
Now, when you operate on this level, touching the most powerful images in society, you're going to generate friction. And when the commission was announced, it brought intense scrutiny to Wiley's past work. Now, looking objectively at the history here, and I want to be very clear to our listeners that we are strictly reporting the facts as laid out in the sources without endorsing any political stance. The criticism from conservative commentators largely focused on a specific series he did based on the biblical story of Judith beheading Holofernes.
Right. The original Caravaggio painting of that scene is incredibly violent. It shows a woman actively severing a general's head.
Right.
Wiley reimagined it by depicting a tall, elegant black woman holding the cleanly severed head of a white woman.
And Wiley himself described the work as a play on the kill Whitey trope. He stated the intent was to brutally challenge and suggest being done with white standards of beauty.
He was bending a traditionally violent art history image to examine the violent underpinnings of society itself.
Right. And that willingness to confront historical violence with modern subjects didn't stop at canvases either. It manifested in his public monuments. We have to talk about rumors of war.
Oh, this is massive.
Yeah.
Literally massive.
Yeah. In 2019, he unveiled a 30-foot tall bronze statue in the middle of Times Square. It's a young black man with dreadlocks, wearing jeans and Nike high tops, sitting triumphantly on a horse.
But the mechanism of the critique is in the specific horse he chose. Wiley modeled it directly on the Confederate monument of J.E.B. Stuart that stood in Richmond, Virginia.
Wow.
And the geography of what happened next is incredible. After its debut in Times Square, Wiley's Rumors of War was permanently moved to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, roughly a mile away from the very Confederate statue it was mocking.
If we go back to what Obama said about Wiley's work, he noted that Wiley elevates ordinary people to look regal, and Obama connected that to his own belief that politics should unfold from the bottom up.
Yes.
Putting a kid in Nikes on a 30-foot bronze horse in the former capital of the Confederacy is the ultimate bottom-up statement. It demands that you physically tilt your head back and look up to someone society usually overlooks.
It forces a reckoning with public space. But, while we've spent all this time looking at the powerful figures on the canvas and on the pedestals, the narrative demands we also look at the complex reality of the man holding the brush.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly profoundly complicated. Let's look at how he actually produces this massive volume of work. Wiley opened a studio in Beijing, China back in 2006.
Initially, he explained it was to reduce costs by employing assistants to do some of the intricate brushwork, like those floral backgrounds we talked about.
He has a studio manager, Ain Koch, who has worked for him for nearly a decade and is an accomplished painter himself. Now, when people hear assistants, it challenges our modern romantic idea of the solitary genius artist suffering alone in a garret.
It does. But if you look at art history, it completely aligns with how the old masters actually operated. Rubens, Rembrandt, they didn't paint every leaf and fold of fabric.
They didn't.
No, they had massive workshops of apprentices and assistants doing the background work, while the master painted the faces and hands. Wiley is replicating the business of the classical masters, not just their aesthetics.
But the complications of the man behind the canvas go far beyond his studio practices. In May 2024, highly serious allegations were made against Kehinde Wiley, which fundamentally shook his standing in the art world.
Yes. And again, to be clear to the listener, we are impartially reporting the details of the allegations, the denials, and the public fallout directly from the sources. We aren't taking any stance on guilt or innocence here.
Exactly. So the timeline of the fallout began when an artist named Joseph Awadarko publicly accused Wiley of sexual assault.
Awadarko alleged that Wiley assaulted him twice, including a severe and violent assault, during and after a dinner event they attended together in Ghana in June 2021.
And Awadarko stated he didn't initially report it due to the harsh legal and cultural climate regarding LGBT rights in Ghana.
Right. And once that initial accusation became public, the scope expanded significantly. 3 other men came forward with their own allegations, spanning more than a decade.
Activist Derek Ingram alleged Wiley raped and sexually assaulted him in 2021. Artist Nathaniel Lloyd Richards accused Wiley of groping him on a date in 2019.
And a photographer named Terrell Armistead accused Wiley of groping and forced oral penetration during an encounter at Wiley's apartment, all the way back in 2010. The accusers stated they were planning to file a class action lawsuit.
Now, Wiley's response to all of this was a vigorous, absolute denial. He stated the allegations were completely false, categorizing them as a social media-driven fabrication.
Regarding the initial claims by Awadarko, Wiley stated they had a brief, entirely consensual relationship. His legal team sent a cease and desist letter demanding the removal of Awadarko's public posts.
And to back up his denial, Wiley's representatives released a series of text messages from the months following the alleged assault in Ghana. They argued these texts showed Awadarko actively asking to meet up with Wiley again, framing it as evidence of a consensual dynamic.
Wiley also specifically disputed elements of the other accuser's stories, stating, for instance, that he had never even met Terrell Armistead.
The institutional fallout was immediate and severe. Museums are highly sensitive to public controversy.
Extremely sensitive.
Yeah. And several major institutions, including the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Perez Art Museum Miami, and the Joslin Art Museum, quickly suspended or completely canceled planned exhibitions of Wiley's work.
which sparked a massive secondary debate about the role of museums. The National Coalition Against Censorship stepped in.
Oh, right. What did they say?
Well, they acknowledged that the allegations against Wiley were serious and concerning, but they publicly criticized the museum's decisions to pull the shows. They argued that art institutions have a duty to contextualize problematic artists, rather than outright canceling their exhibitions and hiding the work from the public.
This raises an important question, and it's one the art world is wrestling with right now in real time. Think about the core of Wiley's work. His entire artistic premise is about confronting uncomfortable histories.
Yes, exposing the hidden illusions of classical power and shifting the dynamics of who is celebrated versus who is exploited.
But now, the public and the museums are being forced to confront the alleged power dynamics of the artist himself behind closed doors. Can you separate the message of the art from the reality of the artist?
It's a tough question.
When an artist's personal life becomes entangled in such severe allegations of abuse of power, how does that impact the massive public monuments they've already created? You can cancel a temporary exhibition, but the Obama portrait is hanging in the Smithsonian. That 30-foot Rumors of War statue is permanently standing in Richmond.
It creates a profound dissonance for the viewer. The art explicitly asks us to empower the vulnerable and question the powerful, while the allegations accuse the creator of exploiting the vulnerable from a position of immense cultural power. It complicates the legacy of every single brushstroke.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with a kid in Los Angeles whose mother sold cast-offs on the sidewalk.
We followed him through the sensory shock of studying in a freezing Russian conservatory,
All the way to picking up a discarded mugshot in Harlem that changed his life.
a discovery that led him to completely hijack the European canon. He figured out the mechanisms of visual propaganda and used them to insert young black men and women from Harlem and Rio de Janeiro into majestic poses of emperors and colonizers.
We saw him paint a historic, boundary-breaking botanical portrait of Barack Obama. We saw him spark intense political debates with his violent biblical reimaginings.
And build towering bronze monuments to challenge the legacy of the Confederacy from the bottom up.
All while navigating the realities of global studio production and, now facing severe and deeply troubling public allegations that have fractured his standing in the museum world.
Ultimately, the mechanism of his art has always demanded one thing, that you look at the people you usually walk past on the street or see in a crumpled mugshot and view them as royalty. It demands a total reevaluation of human worth.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. If Kehinde Wiley's entire artistic project is about interrogating the idea of the master painter and exposing the hidden illusions of power, how does the shifting narrative around his own power change the way you look at his monumental portraits the next time you step into a museum?